As he moved on, the laughter grew louder and he could hear other sounds too. A swishing noise, and now and then a thin, high scream. The tunnel, which by now was wide and very high, took a sudden turn. The sounds seemed to be coming from just beyond the turn. Ivan flattened himself against the wall, peered cautiously round, and almost cried out. He was looking into a great glittering cavern. The floor was blue ice, and enormous icicles hung in thousands from the roof. Hard blue light glowed and flickered like a cold fire, and the wind from the passage moaned around the walls. In the centre of the cavern, its back towards the boy, stood a hideous figure. It was stooped and crooked, and its white robe hung in folds from a bony frame. In one hand it gripped a thin, springy rod, of the kind which Ivan's people used to fish for trout in the river. As Ivan watched, the figure turned, pulled on the rod, and watching something that fluttered and squealed far up near the roof among the icicles. It was then that Ivan saw what the man was doing, and his heart turned cold. Fishing. The creature was fishing, but not in the water, and not for fish. He was fishing in the air, and his victim was a tiny bat that whirled and tugged frantically as the man began to wind in the thin line. But struggle as it might, the poor creature was pulled closer and closer to its monstrous captor, and soon Ivan could see a streak of blood at its mouth from the cruel hook. When the terrified creature was close enough, the man clawed it out of the air, crushed it, and dropped it onto the ice, where the broken bodies of several others lay. Then he threw back his head and laughed horribly. Ivan drew back into the passage. The man's cruelty had sickened him, and the laughter turned his blood cold. He tried to tell himself that it didn't matter. The man had not seen him, so he could just turn around and run away and never see the creature again. But deep within himself he knew the name of this monster. No other man could possibly behave with such cruelty. This man was Stargic. And Ivan knew that if he fell into those awful hands, he need expect no more mercy than the poor broken bat. And somewhere not far away, this creature had his brother. The thought of his little brother in the hands of such a man filled Ivan with rage. He was so angry that his fear left him. He would fling himself on Stargic, snatch the rod from his hand, and beat him with it until he screamed like the bat had screamed. He clenched his fists and stepped into the open. Instantly he froze. It was as though his arms and legs had become ice. Try as he might, he could not move. Stargic no longer fished. He sat down in the middle of the cavern on a throne of age-grey wood, and his icy stare held Ivan rigid. He moved a hand, beckoning with one grey finger. The pale eyes now seemed to draw Ivan across the icy floor until he stood trembling before the throne. Stargic stared down at him, his hands gripping the arms of the chair. His grey beard was stiff with ice, and his hair fell in frozen strand above his thin shoulders. After a long time he spoke, and his voice was like walking on crisp snow. "Who are you?" Ivan stood up, very straight. He hoped that Stargic could not see him trembling. "I am Ivan," he said. "The blacksmith is my father." Stargic's lips twitched cruelly. "Why do you come here?" he hissed. "Do you not know that all who enter Stargic's land are dead?" "I have come for my brother," said Ivan. "Your brother is dead," said Stargic. Ivan shook his head. "No, he's not dead. I can feel him in here. He touched his chest with a mittened hand. "That is not possible," snapped Stargic. "People cannot feel other people. They can only see them or hear them." He flung out a hand. "Do you see your brother here? Do you hear him?" Ivan shook his head. "No, but he is nearby." Stargic gripped the arm of his throne and rose to his feet. "Very well," he said softly. "You are right, little Ivan. Your brother is close by." He turned, beckoning. "Come, I will show you." Ivan's heart leapt. He did not see the smile on Stargic's lips as he turned and shuffled across the floor. Ivan followed. To one side of the cavern, an ice curtain hung from roof to floor. Stargic went behind this curtain, and Ivan was close on his heel. The man turned with a leer, pointing. "Well, Ivan, here he is. Was it worth all your hardships of your journey?" Ivan clapped a hand to his mouth, stifling a cry. He was looking at a great block of ice. It was higher than 3 houses and as long as the cavern. The ice was as clear as a crystal pool, and inside he saw children, many children, trapped in the solid ice. Some looked as though they had been running, others seemed to have been skipping. Some sat and some stood. There were frozen smiles and frozen frowns, and there, right at the frost, gazing out from his icy prison, was Ivan's brother. Stargic laughed cruelly. "Such pretty children," he said, "and mine forever." Ivan looked into the twisted face, and his eyes filled with tears. "But these children do not move," he cried. "You cannot play with them or hear them laugh. You could make such children from painted wood." Stargic shook his head. "Ah, no, the finest woodcarver could not do that. And besides, I take the children to punish those who sent me away." He laughed again. "Once I was a child like these," he said, "but the other children would not play with me. They said my heart was cold, and they sent me away." He turned to the ice prison, resting his hands on it, looking in. "Now I have friends, and every one a pretty one, for I have chosen them myself." He turned, smiling coldly down at Ivan. "You also are a pretty child," he hissed. "You would not be out of place in my collection. You would not be out of place at all. They are happy, you know, with me, for they have forgotten their homes, and now it is time for you to join them." He reached up and snapped an icicle from the curtain. Ivan backed away. Stargic laughed. "It is no use, Ivan. You cannot escape. I have only to touch you with this icicle, and you are mine forever." Ivan felt the ice prison at his back. He could go no further. Stargic grinned and came on, the icicle held out before him. Ivan bit his lip. The ice point was inches from his head. As Stargic stooped for the final lunge, the boy whipped off his mitten and flung the ice pips into the evil face. His voice echoed shrill through the cavern. "Brothers never more shall part, melt the winter in his heart." At once there came a rumbling sound, and the cavern floor quivered. Stargic staggered back with an awful cry, his hands clawing at his face. Ivan was flung to the floor. Behind him, the ice prison heaved, split, and shivered into fragments. He scrambled at the slippery floor, trying to get up. Then something struck him on the head, and he felt himself falling. After a long time, Ivan opened his eyes and cried out. Stargic was bending over him. He rolled away, trying to get up. Stargic watched him. Ivan scrambled to his feet and backed off, eyeing the old man warily. Stargic made no attempt to follow, but stood, gazing at him across the shattered ice. Then the corner of his mouth twitched, so that he seemed almost to smile. Ivan screwed up his eyes, shook his head, and looked again. Stargic was smiling. There was no cruelty now in his smile. There was something in his hand, and he held it out towards Ivan. "Soup," he said. "Hot soup." Ivan took a step forward. Something grabbed at his waist and clung there very tightly. He looked down and saw his brother's head pressed against him. All around, children were awakening, rubbing their eyes and gazing about them. Stargic came closer, offering the soup. He seemed straighter now, less twisted. Ivan took the bowl and backed away, drinking the hot soup and watching Stargic through the steam. "These are furs," said Stargic, "in my storeroom. Many furs. I will fetch them." He shuffled away through the splintered ice. Ivan gazed after him, wondering, passing the soup bowl to his brother. Stargic went several times back and forth with his shuffling gait until a heap of warm furs lay on the floor. "You ought to be going," he said. "There is no wind now, and you have a long journey." And he began to go around from child to child, wrapping the furs about their shoulders, smiling. And when they began to move out through the passage in twos, holding hands behind Ivan, Stargic led the way. There was no wind and no fluttering things now in the quiet darkness, and they came at last to the end of the cave, where their eyes danced to see the snowflakes falling through the pure light. "You will never see me again," said Stargic, "but I shall see you, and when winter comes again, you will have reason to remember how Stargic's heart was warmed." And so they left Stargic's land, and Ivan took them home. And at every village he strode along the street crying, "Here are your children, home again from far away." And the people cheered and brought food and heaped gifts upon them and stood waving as the line of children marched away. With each village the line became a little shorter until at last only Ivan and his brother were left. And so they came home, and the fear melted in their hearts of the people, and they were happy. And when winter came again, Stargic remembered his promise. No one heard him come, for the howling wolves were gone, and his sled, pulled now by silent deer. But when the people woke at dawn, there were sled tracks in the snow and shining gifts by all the children's beds. The end.